The alien world was a husk, stripped of life by endless war. Blackened skies stretched over a barren landscape where nothing grew, and the atmosphere hung heavy with the weight of extinction. Deep beneath this desolate surface lay the last known stronghold of an alien species that had once flourished, now reduced to a scattering of survivors. As the human assault squad readied for the final strike, a cold silence settled over them. Captain Kevin Peterson stood at the head of the group, his face illuminated by the dim glow of his helmet's HUD. He was a veteran of dozens of extermination missions, each one a grim step toward the inevitable, humanity's uncontested dominance of the galaxy. Around him, his squad prepared in silence, checking weapons, calibrating armor, but Kevin's mind was elsewhere. Victory was close, but for the first time, it felt hollow. His second-in-command, Sergeant Leona Briggs, caught his eye as she approached. "Everything's ready, Captain," she said, her voice hard with a sense of finality. Leona was a ruthless soldier, efficient and loyal, a mirror of what Kevin had once been. "Good," Kevin replied. "We finished this today." The squad had gathered for the final briefing aboard their dropship, hovering silently above the alien planet's surface. The warship in orbit had relayed the final scans of the stronghold, a maze of underground tunnels and bunkers, filled with civilians and scattered defenders. Resistance was expected, but nothing they hadn't seen before. Kevin glanced at the holographic map flickering before them, a series of red dots marking the enemy's last bastion. "As of this morning, Command has confirmed this is the last pocket of alien resistance," Kevin said, addressing the squad. "Once we clear this stronghold, the war is over. Humanity will stand alone." He looked at his team, hardened veterans of a long, brutal campaign. Each of them wore the scars of battle, and yet they moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed machine. Sergeant Briggs stood at the front, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Corporal Vince Adams, the squad's demolitions expert, tapped his gauntlet impatiently, ready to bring down walls if necessary. Behind them, the others waited, snipers, engineers, medics, all specialists in the art of war. But it was more than war now. It had become a hunt. Kevin's gaze drifted back to the map, the alien stronghold glowing like a dying ember. These were not soldiers they were hunting anymore, not even an organized resistance. This was an extermination. The mission briefing had emphasized that there were no innocent lives left. Every alien, regardless of age or rank, was a threat. Still, something about it felt wrong, like an itch Kevin couldn't scratch. "We move fast and clean," Leona interrupted his thoughts. "We don't leave anything standing." The dropship descended silently through the atmosphere, cutting through the planet's thick clouds. Outside, the barren landscape came into view, a once thriving alien city reduced to ash and rubble. As the squad checked their weapons one last time, Kevin's thoughts wandered to the countless planets they had visited, each one falling under humanity's unrelenting march. The galaxy had resisted, as it always did, but humanity had grown strong, resilient, apex predators in every sense of the word. The dropship's hatch hissed open, and the squad moved out in perfect formation. They were well practiced, each step precise, each movement calculated. The air on the surface was thick with ash, and the ground cracked beneath their boots as they advanced toward the stronghold's entrance, a massive stone doorway carved into the mountain's base. "Contact in 5, Briggs said, her voice sharp through the comms. "Prepare for breach." As the squad approached, the stone doors rumbled open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. Automated defenses powered up, and alien soldiers, ragged but determined, emerged from the shadows. The first shots rang out, lighting up the darkness. Kevin's pulse quickened, but his movements were automatic, honed by years of battle. They moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting through the alien forces as they pushed deeper into the tunnels. The enemy fell back, retreating into the labyrinthine corridors. Kevin's squad pressed forward, but the deeper they went, the less resistance they met. He noticed it quickly. The aliens were losing the will to fight. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were survivors, holding on to a world that had long since fallen. As they reached the first inner chamber, Kevin paused. Before him stood a cluster of alien civilians. Families huddled in fear, their wide eyes fixed on the human squad. A mother clutched her child, both of them trembling. There were no weapons in sight, no threat. Just terror. "Clear the room," Briggs ordered, but Kevin hesitated. The civilians made no move to resist, and for a brief moment, Kevin felt an unsettling doubt creep into his mind. They had been trained to see the enemy as inferior, as less than human. But here, in the dim light of the stronghold, they looked anything but alien. They were just desperate. "Captain, clear the room," Briggs repeated. Kevin swallowed hard. His grip tightened around his weapon, but he couldn't bring himself to fire. The mission was clear. No alien survivors. But the cold logic that had driven him this far was faltering. He glanced at Briggs, her eyes hard and unyielding, waiting for his command. A long moment passed, but Kevin lowered his weapon. "Move on," he said quietly. "They're no threat." Briggs stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face, but she didn't argue. The squad moved forward, deeper into the stronghold, leaving the trembling civilians behind. Kevin's heart pounded in his chest, the familiar certainty of his mission slipping away. He told himself it didn't matter. The end was near, but something inside him had already shifted. The tunnel twisted and turned as the squad advanced deeper into the heart of the stronghold. The farther they pushed, the quieter the resistance became. The walls, once etched with alien hieroglyphs, were cracked and scorched, remnants of battles fought long before today's siege. Captain Kevin Peterson led the way, his weapon ready, but his mind was drifting. Each step into the crumbling corridors felt less like victory and more like walking into the aftermath of a massacre. Sergeant Leona Briggs moved beside him, her footsteps silent but steady. "We're losing time," she said, voice clipped. Command expected this place cleared by now. Kevin glanced at her. "They're barely fighting back, Leona. It's already over." "It's not over until the mission's done," she snapped. Her eyes were hard, colder than usual. She seemed more mechanical than ever, as if the war had carved out the last remnants of her humanity. She wasn't wrong, though. Orders were orders. Ahead, Corporal Vince Adams gestured toward a fork in the tunnels. "Scanners show life signs down both passages," he reported. "Civilians mixed with soldiers, but there's no telling how many are armed." "Which way do we take?" Briggs asked, eager to press forward. Kevin hesitated. They had been trained to wipe out all alien life on contact, regardless of whether it posed an immediate threat. It was simple on paper, but in practice, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The faces of the civilians they had just passed lingered in his thoughts. Helpless, terrified. How many more were hiding in these darkened halls, clutching their families, waiting for the inevitable? "Split up," Kevin said after a pause. "Leona, you take half the squad down the left passage. Adams, you're with me on the right. We'll converge at the core." Briggs gave a terse nod before leading her team into the left corridor. The tunnel swallowed them, leaving Kevin and his squad in silence. The further they pressed into their own passage, the heavier the air seemed to grow. Adams kept his rifle raised, his usual joking demeanor absent, his face set in grim determination. "Feels like they're waiting for something," Adams muttered under his breath. "I don't like it." Kevin didn't respond. His thoughts were elsewhere, trying to reconcile the orders in his head with the reality before his eyes. They were here to finish a war, but all he saw were the remnants of a broken species, too weak to fight back. He had led this squad on countless missions, but never had he felt this kind of doubt gnawing at his resolve. As they turned a corner, the tunnel opened into another large chamber. What they found stopped them in their tracks. Dozens of alien civilians were huddled together, families once again sheltering in place. They were no different from the group Kevin had seen earlier. But here, the scene was even more desperate. Elders clung to each other, their frail bodies trembling with age. Young children hid behind their parents, their wide, frightened eyes reflecting the pale glow of the human's armor. But the most haunting part was the complete absence of weapons. "These aren't soldiers," Adams whispered. "What the hell is this?" Kevin stepped forward, scanning the room. The civilians shrank back, but not a single one raised a hand in resistance. His heart sank as he realized what he was seeing. This wasn't a fortress. They were exterminating a dying race, clinging to its last moments of survival. "We can't," Kevin started, his voice trailing off. His grip tightened on his rifle. "They're not fighters. We can't just—" "Our orders are clear," Adams interrupted, his voice strained. "No alien survivors." Kevin's jaw clenched. The weight of his decisions bore down on him. All his training, all the years of indoctrination, had led him to this moment, where mercy was weakness and extermination was victory. But this wasn't war anymore. It was slaughter. "We don't have to follow those orders," Kevin said quietly. The squad behind him tensed, unsure what their captain meant. He turned toward Adams, who was watching him carefully, torn between duty and the gnawing unease Kevin knew all too well. "They're not a threat," Kevin continued. "They're just trying to survive." Adams looked over the group of aliens, his face twisted in conflict. "You think Command will let this slide? They'll hang us for disobeying." "I'll take the blame," Kevin replied, his voice firm. "But I won't be responsible for this." Before Adams could answer, movement flickered in the shadows at the far end of the chamber. A small group of alien defenders, what remained of them, emerged from a side tunnel, weapons trembling in their hands. They were barely armed, clearly outmatched, but they stood between Kevin's squad and the civilians, ready to fight to the death. "Last stand, huh?" Adams said, his voice tense. Kevin raised his weapon but hesitated. The defenders posed no real danger to his squad. One volley would cut them down in seconds. He looked at the alien civilians again, the mothers, the children, the elders, and his stomach twisted. "They're defending their families," Kevin said, lowering his rifle. "We've seen this before." "Orders are orders," Adams repeated, but there was doubt in his voice now. Kevin turned to his squad. "We're not killing them." A long silence filled the chamber. His team, trained for nothing but combat, hesitated in a way Kevin had never seen before. The lines between soldier and executioner had blurred, and now they stood on the edge of something they couldn't walk back from. The alien defenders braced for a fight they couldn't win, but Kevin knew the real battle was happening within his squad. This moment, this decision, would change everything. Kevin stood motionless, his rifle lowered, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. The alien defenders, no more than a handful of ragged soldiers, stood their ground, trembling but defiant. Behind them, the civilians huddled together, watching in fearful silence. It was clear they had no chance, but that wasn't what mattered anymore. The real struggle was within Kevin. "You're not serious," Adams said, his voice cracking through the tense silence. His rifle remained trained on the defenders, but his hands shook slightly. "We can't just walk away, Captain. You know what Command will do if we don't finish this." Kevin turned to face his squad, the men and women who had followed him through countless battles, through hell and back. Now, they stood on the precipice of a choice that would define not just a mission, but their very humanity. His decision would either reinforce the brutality they'd been bred for, or begin something different, something that could shift the course of their future. "They're not a threat," Kevin said quietly, but his voice carried authority. "Look at them. This isn't a war anymore. It's an execution." Briggs had rejoined them, emerging from the opposite tunnel with the rest of her squad. She surveyed the scene with hard, cold eyes, and for a brief moment, Kevin saw the glint of something human in her expression, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. "Our orders are clear," she said, her tone flat and unwavering. "No alien survivors. If you hesitate, we all pay the price." "Orders," Kevin repeated, his voice thick with bitterness. "We've followed orders our whole lives, and look where it's gotten us." Briggs stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. It's gotten us to the top. We're here because we do what's necessary. Kevin shook his head slowly. Necessary? Wiping out an entire species isn't necessary. It's genocide. Briggs' hand twitched toward her rifle. Tension crackled between them, palpable, as if the air itself were holding its breath. The squad stood frozen, unsure which way this confrontation would tip. For years, they had trusted Kevin's leadership without question, but now he was leading them into unfamiliar, dangerous territory, one where doubt clouded judgment and morality bled into the mission. "We complete the objective," Briggs said coldly, "or we're done." Kevin met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Maybe we should be done." For a moment, time seemed to stretch thin. Briggs' face twisted in disbelief, as if she couldn't process what Kevin had just said. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words, and the squad watched, waiting for someone to break the silence. "Captain," Adam spoke up hesitant, "if we don't follow through, we're not just disobeying orders. We're throwing everything away. The mission, the cause, everything we've fought for." Kevin sighed, running a hand over his face. "I know what we fought for. I've lived it, just like all of you. But we've crossed a line, and we're not just soldiers anymore. We've become monsters." Briggs stepped closer, her face inches from Kevin's. "You think Mercy will save them? They're the enemy. Always have been." "They're survivors," Kevin shot back. "And they've lost everything." Her eyes flashed with anger, and in one swift motion, she reached for her weapon. "If you're not going to finish the job, I will." Before she could raise her rifle, Kevin's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and forcing the weapon down. The squad tensed, weapons shifting uncertainly. For a brief, charged moment, it seemed like the conflict would explode into violence. But Kevin's grip on her wrist remained firm, his eyes locked on hers, unyielding. "We're not killers," he said softly but firmly. "Not anymore." Briggs wrenched her arm free and took a step back, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. The rest of the squad exchanged uneasy glances, torn between their orders and the reality of what lay before them. The civilians behind the alien defenders watched with wide, terrified eyes, clinging to the fragile hope that they might survive this day. Kevin lowered his weapon entirely, signaling to his squad, "We're leaving." Adams hesitated, his gaze flicking between Kevin and the alien defenders. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his rifle, wrestling with the orders ingrained into him. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled and lowered his gun. The other soldiers followed suit, one by one, their expressions grim but resolute. Briggs glared at Kevin, her face pale with fury. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for. You'll be court-martialed, probably worse. You know that, right?" Kevin nodded. "I know, but at least I'll be able to live with myself." Without another word, Kevin turned his back on the aliens, signaling for his squad to follow him out of the chamber. The alien defenders remained frozen in place, too stunned to lower their own weapons. It took a long, tense moment for them to realize that the humans weren't going to kill them. Slowly, they lowered their guns, watching in disbelief as the squad began to retreat. The humans left the chamber in silence, the sounds of their boots echoing through the tunnels. Behind them, the last of the alien species remained alive, still holding on against all odds. Kevin could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him, but for the first time in years, he felt a sliver of peace. As the squad reached the exit, Kevin took one last glance back. He knew there would be consequences for what he had done. Command wouldn't forgive him, and the rest of humanity might never understand. But for now, in this moment, he had chosen something more important than orders. He had chosen mercy,